Hello everyone. Today we are presenting our research into GPP implementation and compliance across different US states. Starting with the CCPA in 2018, several US states have introduced their own legislation with the intent to preserve the privacy and protection of their residents' personal data. While these bills are a major step towards privacy protection, it begs the question, how can websites make sure they're actually in compliance with the laws they are subject to? To help companies comply with state-level privacy regulations, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, or IAB, introduced the United States Privacy (USP) framework and the Global Privacy Protocol, or GPP. The USP was introduced solely for the CCPA and contains basic user information such as a general opt-out signal. However, USP is no longer officially supported, and the IAB is urging companies to replace it with the GPP. The GPP is a more dynamic framework that accounts for privacy regulation additions and alterations as they occur across the United States. These frameworks can be used by calling an Application Programming Interface, or API, which allows different parties to programmatically transmit and obtain data between each other. We are looking to answer the following questions regarding the GPP. First, are top publishers adopting the GPP framework? Second, are publishers correctly handling opt-out signals? In this instance, we will be analyzing the handling of Global Privacy Control, or GPC, which is a feature that allows users to set a single setting that will communicate opt-outs to every site they visit. And finally, how are these preferences managed across different states, given the publisher's responsibility to comply? The GPP represents user information as a string, or sequence of characters, that can be decoded into a much more readable format. This new representation shows GPC and several other signals such as opt-outs for specific tracking and advertising behaviors. GPP represents different regional laws with what are called sections, which include the user information that is relevant to that specific law. To be completely compliant across the United States, sites would need to implement individual measures for 15 different sections. To help states with the major burden of implementing measures for all these different sections, the IAB created the U.S. National Section. Rather than needing to independently understand and implement all potentially applicable regulations, publishers can implement the national section to, quote, meet the highest common denominator of state privacy law requirements. This section provides a way to store and transfer a user's information that, when implemented properly, will ensure compliance with any U.S. law that they may be subject to.
For our methodology, we executed 3 different crawls with 3 different objectives. The goal of crawl 1 was to measure GPP adoption. We used a California VPN to access the top 10,000 websites listed by Tranco. If a website used the Global Privacy Platform, it was expected to load the GPP API when visited. As a reminder, an API is essentially a standardized method for websites to exchange information. By sending a request to the GPP API to receive GPP details, we could confirm its presence. If no data was returned, we inferred that the API was not implemented. Some websites were tricky to access depending on how we typed the address, so we tried different variations like adding www or switching between HTTP and HTTPS. Checking each website individually would have been time-consuming, so we checked multiple websites at once to significantly speed up the process. Finally, we also looked to see if the USP API was implemented. This gave us a way to compare our findings with previous studies. In crawl 2, we wanted to examine how the information returned by the GPP API varied depending on the user's geographic location. Specifically, we investigated whether a website's implementation of compliance sections and its handling of the Global Privacy Control opt-out signal changed when the site was accessed from different states. We were able to simulate users from California, Florida, Texas, and Iowa. To do this, we started with a dataset from crawl 1, which included websites that had functioning GPP API responses for a California-based user. We then used a VPN to simulate visits from 4 different states. For each state, we enabled the GPC opt-out signal, visited the websites, and recorded which compliance sections were present and whether the GPC opt-out was correctly registered as true or false. Crawl 3 focused on digging deeper into where GPP information can be found on websites. Specifically, are cookies with the GPP string being set, and if the GPP string is the GPP string included in URL parameters? To find out, we used a VPN based in California and revisited the same set of websites from crawl 1. Once the website loaded, we extracted the cookies it set and checked the URL parameters for any GPP strings. For all crawls, we used tools like Puppeteer or Selenium to automate Chrome or Firefox browsers.
Now that we've covered our methodology, let's look at the key takeaways from each of the 3 crawls. In the first crawl, we seek to answer the following questions. How many websites currently employ the GPP and USP APIs? How do those numbers compare to previous studies on the USP? As outlined in our methodology, not all websites in our dataset could be accessed. Despite trying out a list of common prefixes, 1,700 out of 10,000 websites remained inaccessible. That left us with 8,300 accessible websites. Among those, only 424 had implemented the GPP. That's just 5.1% of accessible sites, and when considering the full sample, even lower at only 4.24%. It is possible that some websites stuck with the older USB API. Supporting this, we found that 553 websites, or 5.53% of the total sample, still implement USB. For comparison, in the Johnny Still Can't Opt Out paper published in 2024, they found that USB adoption on the same dataset was around 8%. Let's see how the URLs are split between GPP and USB. In the top 3,000 ranks, GPP clearly takes the lead, with 101 websites employing GPP as compared to USB 65. As we move into the 3,000 to 10,000 range, the competition evens out, with USB slightly pulling ahead. The pie chart shows the overall distribution, a strong presence for both platforms, but also a significant number of shared websites that use both GPP and USB. Based on results from the previous study, 8% for USB adoption, we anticipated similar if not higher levels of GPP adoption, especially since GPP was introduced to provide a more standardized and scalable framework. It suggests that GPP adoption is still limited and far from mainstream. While USB adoption has dropped since the Johnny Still Can't Opt Out paper, it is still higher than GPP adoption.
In Crawl 2, we observed the following sections that were implemented across the websites. Section 7, the U.S. national string for MSPA, was the most implemented among all 4 states. For Iowa and Texas, nearly 200 out of 415 implemented it. Otherwise, the most common result was no section implementation at all. California stood out with a shift towards the state-specific, or 8, section, likely due to stricter laws and enforcement. Only 2 websites dynamically adjusted their sections to be state-specific across all 4 states. As for GPC results, 3 of the 4 states had over half of the websites correctly recording the GPC signal when the U.S. national section was present. This was true for Iowa with 77%, Texas with 77%, and Florida with 85%. California was the exception with only 46% correctness. This may have to do with the varying number of websites implementing the U.S. national section. Regardless, it appears that correctness is less prioritized for California. Interestingly, Florida had the fewest websites implementing the U.S. national section, but the highest rate of GPC accuracy. Crawl 3. As we used JavaScript to find if a website had GPP during the first crawl, it was not surprising that none of the websites contained the string within the URL parameters. The cookies, however, were a little more surprising. There seemed to be no reason why cookies were or were not seen on certain websites. The websites from the 2000 to 3000 on the Tranquil ring contained the most at 77 cookies. As shown in the graph, this followed a nonlinear pattern, but it seemed to fluctuate less towards the end of the 10,000 websites.
The first legal implication of this research is that it provides legislators with a specific compliance mechanism they could require in state legislation. This would facilitate compliance and provide a built-in auditing mechanism. This would, in turn, increase compliance with privacy laws and give states a method to check that compliance. A second legally significant finding is that data shows that when websites implement a compliance mechanism, they do so correctly in a majority of instances. As such, where states require compliance mechanisms to be implemented, it is likely those measures would be effective in increasing compliance with privacy laws. A third legal significance that rises from this paper is that websites in various states want a national privacy law standard. The data shows that websites in most states prefer to use the national standard in the GPP, which helps them comply with the strictest common denominator among state laws. In a similar vein, feasibility and ease of implementation should be considered when designing these legislations and mechanisms. If websites are willing to forego complying with laxer state laws in favor of universally complying with the state law that is most strict, it is likely they would be willing to comply with a single coherent federal law. The findings in this paper can be foundational to many avenues for future work. To start, the work in this paper could be expanded. It will be useful to expand the crawl to states without privacy laws in place, as well as other states with privacy laws that we did not cover in this paper. This would expand the sample size of the research and confirm the significance of the findings about the adoption of the GPP and its correctness. It would also provide a useful opportunity to see whether websites in states without privacy laws are using the GPP as well. Other future work could explore potential compliance and enforcement mechanisms for other parts of state privacy laws, both what those could be and their efficacy. This paper focused on compliance with opt-out signals from users, which is a main concern of state laws now, but many states include many other requirements in their privacy laws. Other work could use this paper as a springboard to develop other enforcement and compliance mechanisms for other parts of privacy laws. Finally, other work could look at the other signals communicated by the GPP. This paper focused on users' communications of their opt-out preferences, but we also discovered that the GPP is capable of communicating other information about users. These sections include information related to minor protection laws and age-specific regulations. Using the methods we used in our paper, those sections could be similarly analyzed. Other studies could look at the use of those portions of the GPP and the correctness of websites' communications of those other signals.